Unpopular opinion, but everyone should learn to make their own clothes. Hear me out. Sewing is one of the greatest superpowers anyone could have. The thrill of the stitch, the craftsmanship, the deep sense of peace, and of course, the true delight of a new garment. Let's dive in and talk about how you should learn to sew, the horrors of fast fashion, and how they impact sewing, and how to make sewing more affordable. All while I finish this big bucket of works in progress I have been putting off for, well, years. Because if we're going to talk about sustainability, fast fashion, and why you should sew, then it's best that I show you how it's done. Also, there are chapters in this video, so feel free to jump around to find what you're looking for. I know many people find a love of sewing simply for creative expression. It lets you experiment, play, and create a unique, totally original garment just for you. When was the last time you sat down to play? Maybe elementary school? I wonder what the world would be like with more people exercising their creative muscles. Think about it. There are over 8 billion people in the world. Imagine what we could do when we practice our creativity. I try to sew every day, and that allows me to utilize my creativity and imagination. That's the thing about creativity. If you don't use it, you lose it. But it's a skill like anything else, and when you start working on your creativity, you'll be surprised how quickly it comes back. Sewing is not easy, but I still think what I said is true. Everyone should learn to sew. As I've mentioned before, creativity allows us to problem solve, and that leads us to our next topic, grit. There's a book by Angela Duckworth, a psychology professor, called Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. Grit is perseverance even when the going gets tough. Just like creativity, grit is a skill that can be learned. If we don't work on our grit, we'll be woefully unprepared for what the future might hold. When things get tough, you just need to push through. And that's sometimes how sewing is. Sometimes I feel upset about the way a project is going and I have to set it aside. But then in the middle of the night, I may have a eureka moment and I'll push through the next day. For beginner sewists, it may take some time to make something, and that's okay. You don't have to make a garment every week. I don't. You just have to enjoy the process of learning. Your grit will serve you well in sewing and in life. It's a learning process, and you're not going to be perfect overnight. Another reason to sew is you're no longer held to today's trends. You want a black trench coat that resembles Sherlock Holmes? You can make that. You want a poofy ball gown for under $200? You can make that. You want a classic Audrey Hepburn little black dress? You guessed it, you can make that. Your creativity will soar with the possibilities of putting needle to fabric. Even when I'm copycatting a designer's work, I'm still playing and creating. I can choose the exact color I want or the fabric that works for me. You're no longer a slave to what the algorithm shows you. You can be you, a more confident, better dressed, imaginative you. Everyone wears clothes. Well, maybe not nudists, but everyone every day puts on some type of garment. It's a universal theme, part of the collective mindset. But have you ever wondered how your clothes were made? Maybe you haven't, but you should. In this world of poor quality clothing and increasing prices, in combination with the rise of fast fashion, it might just be worth it to sew your own clothes. Why? Because, for me, I'm concerned with the way people are treated inside these factories. I'm also concerned with the amount of toxic chemicals released into the environment to create the vivid colors in certain types of fabrics. And I'm also finding it harder and harder to find good quality clothing, something that will stay with me for many years. That is, something that will stay with me for many years that I can realistically afford. I'm not saying you can't or shouldn't wear these fabrics in fast fashion, but it certainly leads one to consider the environmental impact and if that's important to you. But I'm also concerned with the environmental impact of resource-intensive fabric like rayon, which is not good for our planet. Neither is cotton, but at least that doesn't shed microplastics into the water supply like polyester does. Polyester is literally made of oil and it sheds microplastics. Microplastics, while a new area of study, the early research suggests that microplastics can lead to cardiac issues, among other issues. While we don't know the true impacts of microplastics yet, research is warning of the potential health and environmental impacts. Look, I try my best to stick with natural man-made fibers like cotton, linen, wool, and silk, but these fibers are not the cheapest and some require special washing. For instance, some silks can only be dry cleaned. I'll caution you. When I washed one of my favorite silk shirts by hand, the colors bled. That's why it's often recommended to take your silk shirts to the dry cleaners. This is expensive and has an environmental impact. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. All of this information is not to persuade you to entirely purge your wardrobe with certain fabrics. In fact, I think it's impossible in this day and age to completely swear off man-made materials and semi-man-made fabrics. Look at your ready-made garments. I bet you won't be surprised to see lots of spandex, polyester, and blends. Even high-end brands rely on polyester and blends. But when you sew, you're in control of exactly what you want to make, what materials to use, and you can consider the ethical implications of fashion if you so desire. For many sewists, this is the reason they sew, creating quality clothes, appreciating the work it takes to make something, and reducing the impacts of fashion's environmental toll. But how do you learn to sew and do so cheaply? Sewing can get very expensive very fast. This setup alone can run you anywhere from a few $100s to, well, the sky's the limit. So today, I'm going to go over the cheapest ways to learn to sew. Luckily, where I live, there are sewing classes where I can rent a machine to work on, and they provide the supplies, and you learn to sew your first ever item. This is a great option to not only learn from experienced teachers, but it also makes it less daunting. I highly recommend finding someone to learn from, whether that's your grandma, the neighbor next door, or a friend. Perhaps you can even find a class in your town. But sewing is so much more fun when you have people to share the hobby with. That's why the sewing community is so vibrant on social media. And speaking of social media, I found that sewing is one of the nicest niches to be a part of. Everyone seems so kind. That's rare when it comes to social media, as I'm sure you may know. If you don't have classes in your area, there are a few options. First, there's YouTube University. YouTube has a wealth of information, and I've linked one of my favorite channels for learning to sew. Heads up, it's a shameless plug for my friend's channel. You can also find sewing machines at thrift stores and on Facebook Marketplace. Just make sure you can power it up and test it before you buy it. You don't want to get scammed. But fabric, that's where the real costs come into play. Sure, sewing machines are expensive. Obviously, there's the upfront cost and then continuing maintenance. Heads up, you should probably be servicing your machine every year. But fabric, that can run you into expensive territory. Before you indulge in yards and yards of fabric, try using old bed sheets, tablecloth, anything with a large amount of fabric that's relatively inexpensive. I highly recommend going thrifting for discarded fabrics, especially when you're a beginner. It's nice to use less expensive thrifted fabric because if you make a mistake, it's not like you've wasted very expensive fabric. And some fabric is trickier to sew than others. For instance, silk. Stay away from silky materials until you are more advanced. Same with stretchy material. But these are just tips. You do you. This is just what works for me. But you don't always have to stick to the thrift store or bedding. Eventually, you may want to venture out of your comfort zone and buy fabric. I'm a big fan of Mood Fabrics online shop as I don't live in New York City. But if I did, it would be very dangerous because I love all the fabrics at their flagship store. You see, sewing and fabric buying are two separate hobbies. You've been warned. Also, if you decide to venture to Mood, be prepared to be overwhelmed. I don't get overwhelmed very easily, but boy was that overwhelming going there. So many options and fabric stacked on top of more and more fabric. All in all, sewing is a fantastic hobby. It's inherently creative, it teaches you new skills, and helps you improve your grit. It lets you create your most individual wardrobe. You could stay on top of the trends or make something entirely unique to your personality and taste. It will help you learn new skills which cognitively will help you exercise your brain. Sewing ain't easy, but it's so worth it. I highly recommend you give it a go. And would you look at that, I finally finished all my outfits. Thanks for coming along on my journey to finally finish my years-long work in progress. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing as this helps my channel. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.